Hello, everyone. Welcome to Clean Energy for All, our next session in our Education and Action series. My name is Melissa. I'm a distributed organizer with the Sierra Club Pennsylvania chapter. I'm going to go ahead and launch our slideshow as other people filter in. All right. Tonight's topic is energy equity in our homes. I'm going to start with our Zoom setup. So please keep yourself on mute when you are not speaking. Turn on your video if you're comfortable, but take note that we are recording. To rename yourself, when you open the participants list, you can hover over the three dots and click rename. Introduce yourself and ask questions in the chat. Closed captions are available if you would like to turn those on. And then you can also raise your hand if you want to speak when we get to our Q&A portion. A few community agreements so that everyone is able to participate fully in today's session. Please engage with kindness. All forms of discrimination will not be tolerated. Speak from your own experience. And if you find yourself speaking a lot, be sure to leave space for others. Do stay on mute while our speakers are presenting. There is going to be plenty of time at the end for your questions. But if you do think of questions while they're presenting, you can go ahead and put those in the chat and we'll get to them when we get to the Q&A period. And the double plus sign is always a great way to indicate that something resonates with you. If you're having technical problems, also ask for help in the chat. We have folks here today to help you with that. Our speaker is going to try not to use jargon, acronyms, and industry language, but do ask if you need clarification about something. Our time is limited, so we may ask that you continue a conversation individually outside of this space. We might not also have all the answers to all of your questions tonight, but we'll get back to you with answers afterward. And if you have a question about a topic that's not related to tonight's session, feel free to email us and we will look into that for you as well. And please approach all the ideas tonight with an open mind. Okay. Our speakers tonight, we have Emily Abendroth, Program Manager with Philly Climate Works, and Michelle Crouch, a steering committee member with the Here for Climate Justice Coalition. Facilitating along with me tonight is Kelsey Krebs, Senior Campaign Representative with Beyond Dirty Fuels. We're going to start with a quick overview of our CEFA series. We're going to turn it over to Emily and Michelle to take us through the main portion. We're going to go through action steps that you can take after tonight, and then we'll finish with our Q&A. So a quick overview of our CEFA series for those of you that are not yet familiar with it. So our guiding vision for this series is that we will achieve 100% clean energy in Pennsylvania by contributing to a movement for climate action centered on equity, reframing the public vision for energy from one based on extractive fossil fuels to one based on clean energy that is necessary for healthy and safe communities, and ensuring political power is in the hands of the people and not dirty industries. And this will lead to state policies that promote investment, clean energy, efficiency, sustainable transportation, and building electrification, and phase out the extraction and use of fossil fuels. Our format, we're having bi-monthly sessions. This is our third. We always have an education component, an action component, and we're trying to build a community here as well. Our past episodes are available, both our series introduction from February and our session about hydrogen energy. So both are quite interesting. They're now up on our brand new launched CEFA webpage. So we'll get the link for that for you in the chat, and you can check out our past episodes. So with that, I will turn it over to Emily and Michelle.
Cool. Thanks so much, Melissa. Appreciate it. We're glad to be here tonight. Also glad to see some folks that I have already had the treat to meet. So nice to see you again in this context. We're gonna today just talk about the work that the Here for Climate Justice Coalition is doing, sort of introduce you all to it, and then be really happy to expand on any parts that folks would be excited for us to say more about. So I'm going to start off just by, I can repeat, I'm Emily, and I am work with Sierra Club, Philly Climate Works, but I'm also part of this coalition that is Here for Climate Justice, that stands for Housing Equity, Repair, and Electrification for Climate Justice. And I'm going to move us to a slide deck in a minute, but I thought maybe I would just speak as my own head for a second before putting a static image up there, and just say that it is a coalition that formed in 2020. So, and it's started during the pandemic, which has also meant that for its first year to 2 years, it meant entirely online. However, it includes a bunch of partner organizations that have done work together across intersecting concerns, struggles, fights, etc., for much longer than that in many cases. They're Just to give you a kind of sense of the range of the member organizations, it includes groups like Community Legal Services, Green Building United, Michelle's involved in the Renters Coalition, Philly Thrive, Jobs with Justice. And so some of the ways we talk about it is that there's a mix of groups that are community organizations, folks advocating for workforce development, folks working specifically around housing justice, and a whole variety of environmental climate justice organizations as their focus. And now I am going to go ahead and just share my screen in order to introduce you to that. So as I was just saying, the Here for Climate Justice Coalition brings together community organizations, home repair providers, workforce development, community development partners, and climate justice groups across Philly to fight for safe, healthy, affordable, fossil-free housing for all. We started with the notion that housing justice is climate justice, and particularly here in the city, that they're interconnected and pretty much inseparable from one another. One of the ways that we have thought about that is that we need solutions that address both of them at the same time. And part of the way we think about the equity component of that, which will come up later when we're talking about definitions, is seeking to overcome racial and economic exclusion by prioritizing those communities that are most burdened by things like air and water pollution, severe weather, home disrepair, and the affordable housing shortage. What that looks like then as a demand is that we're demanding in a variety of ways large-scale public investment in programs to repair, weatherize, and electrify hundreds of thousands of homes across Philly, along with policies to ensure affordability for working class tenants and homeowners. What that has meant for us right now is that we talk about our focus points sort of through 3 lenses. There were a number of members of our coalition yesterday who participated in an action that was led by Power, who is also a member organization of the coalition, down at City Hall, that was specifically focused on PICO. But in the context of Here for Climate Justice generally, we're focusing on pushing for affordable, renewable, fossil fuel-free utilities. And in this case, what they were pushing on was to PICO has to bring to the PUC where its energy is actually going to come from. Right now, it gets a pretty pathetic amount from solar and wind, literally 0.5 of 1%, and that is the mandate, and they are meeting the mandate. But the mandate itself is pretty dismal. And so Power is doing what they're calling a people's energy plan, trying to really urge PICO to enlarge that percentage with the aim of it being 100% of an end goal, but knowing that that won't necessarily happen immediately as a transition. So one set of our goals is around exactly that. We have also done a bunch of work in this past year around PGW, Pacific Gas, Philadelphia Gas Works, participating in testifying in various processes to also try to get them to commit to meet the city's climate goals, which are themselves maybe not ambitious enough, are aimed to get net zero by 2050. But even if they might be under ambitious, in no way is PGW currently meeting them, or aiming towards meeting them. So we've been doing a lot of work around that. One of our others is around comprehensive whole home repair. In this last year, that has, so what we have like called that is like pushing for healthy, affordable, climate resilient housing for all Philadelphians. That's sort of like the overarching banner by which we've called that demand. Specifically here in this moment, that has looked a lot like supporting the passage at the state level of the whole home repair program. Happily, that did pass last year. There's a push right now to get it to be re-allotted funding for the year to come and hopefully permanently. That is an ongoing battle, for lack of a better word, both to like have it continue to exist and continue to scale up. That program was also somewhat modeled off of a Philadelphia pilot here run by the Philadelphia Energy Authority called Built to Last, that we'll talk a little bit more about later, but basically for Here for Climate Justice, that has looked like supporting those two as they exist, supporting their enlargement and like full like financial capacity, and also advocating for even more because we know the scale is actually much, much larger than either of those alone. And then the last is just that for both of those that we're talking about, there's a lot of workforce development that will have to happen in order for those to be achieved. And so we're really pushing for family and community sustaining jobs as being connected to actually meeting the urgency of those and making sure that people who are doing the work so that those things happen also have their own livelihoods and health and safety supported along the course of it. And I think I'll sort of leave that one there and turn it over to Michelle to see if there's anything to add or move on, or also just for Michelle is the steering committee member. So the structure of Here for Climate Justice is that we are a full coalition, but we also have a smaller body currently of 5 folks who act as a steering committee that really like hold us to our values, make sure that we're proceeding forward in action and in language in ways that are in keeping with those goals as we've set them for ourselves.
Yeah, no, I think that's great, Emily. Thank you. And yeah, I'm sure we may have chances to expand on elements of that as we move into our Q&A. But first, I just wanted to give a little bit of background about myself and how I got involved with this work, because I really came more from the housing side. I've always, it's not that I don't care about climate and energy, but, it was something that always just felt a little bit like kind of so large and overwhelming to me that I didn't really like know what to do. And I think I, felt a bit kind of disillusioned with well, if you just recycle and use like a compostable plates at your birthday party, like, the sort of individual action level. So it wasn't something I'd been super engaged in, but housing was something that felt very immediate to me. I had my own struggles with finding safe and secure and affordable housing, especially as a single parent, where you have a lot higher concerns about, like safety levels and lead paint and wires and things than you might if you're as then I did when I was like, 23 and could like crash on the couch and it was fine. Things changed a lot, and it really opened my eyes to how dire the situation was for tenants in Philadelphia. And a big piece of that being the increasing rents. I first moved into the city in 2007. And in that era, and then in the sort of Great Recession era, like rents were really pretty affordable. And I left the city and came back 5 years later and found that rents had like doubled and tripled when I came back in 2016. Maybe not tripled, but definitely, 50 to 100% increases. And that is what we are seeing in the tenant work I'm doing right now. So I got involved in the Philadelphia Tenants Union, and that picture, if you could go back just for one moment to the picture. This is one of the first buildings I organized in with Philadelphia Tenants Union. It is a senior building. It is about, I think, 270 units. It's in the Winfield Heights area of Philadelphia. It's like on Conshohocken Avenue, if you're in Philly and you know where that is. It was built in 1967, and it is in dire need of updates. So one thing I found is that one of the main complaints, one of the main issues in this building was not just that rents were going up just, exponentially, but also that the condition of the building itself was just in really bad shape. The elevators regularly didn't work, which is a huge fire hazard. Especially if you're a senior citizen, there are a ton of people, with mobility issues in wheelchairs. There actually was a fire and people couldn't get out. Luckily, it was controlled, but their fire suppression system didn't work. Was out of code. Their elevators often didn't work. There was sometimes not heat in the winter, which is illegal. There was often not air conditioning in the summer when temperatures are now reaching like 9,500 degrees in Philadelphia. And air conditioning isn't a thing that landlords are required to provide unless it is specifically indicated in your lease that you will be provided either window unit or central air, then it's not required. So one thing I was really finding is that besides rent, just the conditions of the buildings themselves. And, this is a large building. Philadelphia is also very our housing stock is more in the form of single family row houses that are attached, but there are still some larger buildings like this. And both the row houses and the larger buildings are all by and large very old, like really old, and are in dire need of repairs. And so to me, the climate piece kind of came in as just like the necessary part of that. We have to fix these buildings. People have to be living in better conditions. Their utility bills need to be coming down. And we also need to be prepared for the effects of a changing climate. So it's sort of two pieces of we need to make our homes we need them to both have a less impact on the climate with their energy use, but we also need to be prepared for the effects of a changing climate that are coming. And so I think after doing some of this work for a while, I'm also part of the Philadelphia Rent Control Coalition. So our focus really is on like trying to regulate or have some kind of stabilization for those rents that are just really crazy right now. But I was invited to join here for climate justice, and it's been amazing. It's been really educational for me. I've learned a lot, and it's also really helped me understand all these intersections and how, housing touches everything. I think that's part of why it's been something I wanted to get involved in. It's something everyone needs a house. And I think it is a vector to talk about so many other issues. And I think really climate and housing really are so interlinked, but there aren't a ton of groups that are really working on both issues very closely. And of course, the labor piece follows from that as well. So that's just a little background on me. And yeah, I'm continuing to do tenant work and also work with your procedure. All right. Yeah, here, I think now we're going to do just a little quick vocab because, some of these terms, you get super used to saying them all the time if you're in meetings about it a lot, but also it's just good to have some grounding and even for myself to review them. So our first one here, electrification. So this, it's in the here part of here for CJ or here for climate justice. But so what this really means is getting off of fossil fuels. So moving to electric cooking, electric heat, and particularly we talk a lot about heat pumps. So it's not just necessarily moving to like a baseboard heater or space heaters or forced air, but like to these very particular technologies that are much, much more energy efficient. And then weatherization is actually another piece of that. We've talked some about in some instances where groups that are working on electrification or making systems more energy efficient go into a home. And the very first step before you can do some of that higher level electrification work is the weatherization. So, it's not just having it insulated and not being drafty, but also just kind of, making sure that even basic systems are working. And then also making sure that just the building is as efficient as it can be, and that all the systems are kind of working in tandem. And then also we use the term decarbonization a lot. So that is the elimination of greenhouse gas emissions. So again, that's about, moving away from fossil fuels.
The one thing we also have been trying to think about as a group in decarbonization is often when folks talk about that, they're talking about emissions that are released into the outside. And we're also trying to think about emissions that people are subject to even inside and in the context of their own homes. So looking at some of the health impacts, there are more and more reports coming out about this across the last 12 months about gas stove emissions, et cetera. So not only like those that are going into the larger atmosphere, but those that are maybe actually being produced within the domestic atmosphere of your space. They're one of the things multiple organizations within this coalition we're trying to grapple with across these last few years is the way, both honestly for COVID and now for the air quality stuff, the sort of advice coming from a very de-resourced and low infrastructured city and state is to shelter in place, right? Or to stay at home as a way to keep yourself safe. And a bunch of the things that folks have been having to grapple with and think through is like, sometimes that home is not safe. And so what if that actual command really doesn't make sense in that context, or protect you from a series of things, both of the physical state of the house and like sort of the air quality within it and all of the rest. The retrofit term is another one that we use. It's one that also the whole home repairs program uses a lot. And it is that I like this definition that's here, updating an older home or building to address the needs of our climate future. It does a nice job of actually elaborating beyond just the notion of repair, right? Of just getting the house back to the state maybe it was when it was first built, but actually thinking like there are things these houses might need in the conditions that we're facing today or know that we will be facing 10 years from now. Things we know are happening are increased flooding, things we know are happening are increased heat, temperature spikes, et cetera. And so what it means for these houses to be habitable in 2028 might be pretty different from what it meant for them to be habitable in 1918. And so the retrofit part is really trying to think through that. And then the equity, we put this one last just because it's such an overarching concept around the entirety of the way that we're trying to like frame our values in here for climate justice, really recognizing that some of the green transitions that are happening currently are happening for folks who have the resources and affluence to make them happen in their own individual home, and the danger that that could create a scenario. Just to talk about one example here in the context of Philly, if like everyone who can afford to electrify their house does, and those who cannot afford it are left on on PGW, on a gas infrastructure system that whose prices continue to climb in order to try to make up the gap of that transition. So we're really trying to push for policy changes, legislation, commitments from these individual infrastructures and institutions to not have that be the path. But to actually prioritize those who are most impacted and least able to make that transition without support in doing so, incentive in doing so. So this definition that's here, Michelle put these together and very helpfully like also pulled that from our own actual mission statement. So it really is kind of framing like what equity means to us in our context and in the context of this work in Philly. I don't know, anything you would add on that from that front, Michelle?
I think so. I mean, it's just in Philadelphia, the reality is that when you talk about most impacted people, like you mean generally Black people, and you mean communities that have been disinvested in over and over again. And it is generally communities of color. Although, of course, there are many populations that have been disadvantaged in different ways in Philadelphia, but just keeping that really centered for us.
Mhm. Also, our communities that have often been the victims of fossil fuel infrastructure being located directly next to their homes as well. So how not to sort of continue and replicate that structure too. Um, we wanted to spotlight for a minute the Built to Last program. One of the that is one that folks within the coalition and folks in general in Philly have been excited about, because specifically because it does try to think about comprehensive home repair, and is doing a pilot that spotlights those who are most in need of both urgent home repairs, and doesn't only make those repairs, but tries to think about how can we do a retrofit that addresses the climate future. So not every one of those homes has looked the same. They have had different needs, and therefore what the kind of work that has been done to them has looked different. The way that Built to Last has worked to date, it's only been around for 2 years. It's run by the Philadelphia Energy Authority. Those pilots got funded from a combination of things. One thing they've done really well is to like braid together a bunch of different existing programs and resources, and then also write some serious grants to like build in the gaps. One of the things that Michelle was speaking to earlier around the weatherization as it relates to like electrification is that something that very unfortunately has often been the case here in Philly is folks get on years-long waiting lists for both weatherization and what they call basic systems repair. Like if your furnace goes out or your roof collapses, or there's your bathroom has basically stopped being functional and you cannot afford to do the necessary and quite expensive work that would take. You can apply for these. You are not likely to get an immediate and rapid response. And in fact, what sometimes happens to people, there are 2 separate lists, is that you might make your way to the top of the weatherization repair list. They might come to your home and they might say, we're unable to do this weatherization because you have a major roof repair that makes it irrelevant. Rather than doing that other one, you're just bumped back down to the bottom of the weatherization and still waiting for the other. So Built to Last was really meant to try to address that component and see that like someone's home is seen as a whole unit, and that they actually leave that program and those repairs with a habitable, safe space that is additionally, in the ways that is possible, doing updates. Sometimes they're actually doing electrification. A few of the houses we went to had gotten an induction stove. A couple of them were getting solar installed. Some of them are only getting pre-electrification, which is literally to like upgrade their panel so that it can handle these things when they are implemented. So if systems are working, they're not just intrinsically replacing them, but if there are systems to be replaced, they're prioritizing replacing them with non-fossil fuel options. And really, like Here for Climate Justice is trying to be an advocacy organization, leverage as much power as we can in order to push some of these policy legislative changes, but also like use lived experience expertise to advocate for even the programs that are existing that we do want to see expanding, be more accessible, be easier to apply for, actually be available in multiple languages, in multiple forms, where like if you can't do it online, you can do it on paper. So we're really both pushing for these programs to exist and to exist in as like widely available and meaningful forms as they can. And the thing that Michelle and I were going to close on, I'll also just hand it to Michelle to see if there's anything to want to add. And I think we're both excited to get your questions to sort of frame what more we could say. There's kind of a million things we could say about this, and so happy to dive into any other parts, but we wanted to also leave you with a few action steps. And I'm going to turn to Michelle for a minute. Let Michelle be here as a face, and then
is that our houses are very old in Philadelphia. A lot of times you can't even know the exact date. Like if you go into the city database, it'll say 1925, but that's because there was like a fire and all the records got destroyed. So they just put in 1925, but a lot of houses are actually much older than that. And also the note about asthma and like air quality in the home, again, being a huge factor. And that mold is a huge issue we see in rental units in particular, and also pests. And that could be like the stories I could tell you about raccoons that have fallen through people's ceilings, but also just like roaches and insects are also a factor that increases asthma. And so when you're in a row house and you're connected to your neighbors, or you're in an apartment building, if your neighbor has pests, you probably have pests. So in some ways, I think Philadelphia is a great reminder of this connection that we have, and that we can't just do one house at a time here and there. It has to be something that is done at a very large scale. And that is going to have to be a really huge investment, because retrofits are not necessarily cheap. In some ways, it can be cheaper to just tear down a house and build a new one. You know, it's pretty easy to build new construction that's energy efficient. It is harder to retrofit older housing, but also that is the only way for people to be able to stay in their homes, is to do these repairs kind of as a long process. And it is, of course, more better for the environment too, not to just like knock things down, throw it away, throw up something new. So those are great. Yeah. So this is, you know, if you're in the Philly area, we would love to have you come to what is really our first like kind of public facing event. You know, a lot of this work over the past few years has been really refining like, what are our demands? What are we here for? What are we asking for? And this is really an opportunity to kind of start like sharing that with people and trying to connect with other people and honoring work that existing groups in Hunting Park in particular have done. But so it's going to be just a Saturday outdoor event at the Hunting Park Rec Center, but you know, we're going to try and make it really fun and have food and very joyful, and then also have some resources for the community, and also have groups who provide resources to be there tabling. So it's both, you know, connecting organizations to each other and connecting organizations to people, and asking people for their feedback on these priorities that we've developed, saying, is this what you would need? Would you want something else? And I'm really excited about it. So we have an Eventbrite that just got popped in the chat. So this would be a great one if you are local. We'd love to see you.
Awesome. Thanks, Michelle. The last one that we want to highlight, we were doing a big push around this at the beginning of June. It is still relevant. The budget has not yet been passed. So the state of this is the House, the last that I knew concretely, the House had passed along a budget to the Senate that included funding for whole home repair. So that's positive. It means that that is what we're hoping for. It was an $125 million allotment for this first year. We were trying to push for that to double. That probably won't be it probably won't be a doubled number, honestly, when that budget finally passes, but it does look like it will become a permanent item, which would be great and amazing, meaning that there would be a commitment to some level of funding for whole home repairs into the foreseeable future. It will every year be a bit of a like fight to see what the size of that allotment can and will be. In this first year, there were only 2 counties out of the like 67 across Pennsylvania who didn't apply for it. So that's like well over 95%. It represents a fact that the need is quite large. That's clearly like bipartisan. Those are not either all Democratic or all Republican counties. They're across the board, people naming that home repair is an urgent need within the context of their spaces. So At this point, what we're asking for around this is to focus on senators and to have that number remain as large as it possibly can and remain as a standing item within the budget as it exists when it is passed. So there's also a link in the chat that will take you to one that like has a call script, gives you a link to find your own legislators. This is one, I know a lot of our work is Philly focused. And so a lot of what Michelle and I have been saying is Philly focused, but this is actually one where if you're outside Philly, it's awesome because it is a lot of those legislators that most need to be pushed and prodded. So we wanted to just highlight that one right now as well, since it's so sort of on the cusp of time. And I will stop sharing and hand it back over to Melissa.
Wonderful. Thank you both so much. That was so interesting. I'm going to now present some action steps that you can take with Sierra Club. Okay, so let's. Perfect. Okay, so if you are interested in paying attention to the budget, to whole home repairs legislation, any piece of legislation that has to do with the topics that Michelle and Emily were talking about, funding for them, we have an ongoing weekly legislative update series where we talk about what's happening in Harrisburg. We hear from Jen Quinn, our legislative and political director, all of the timely weekly updates. We are actually having a session on July 5th because there is not a budget. We were supposed to be finished for the spring, but the budget may not be on time. So we will just keep rolling with this program every week until the legislature breaks for the summer. So we'll be getting all of these links to you in the chat. You're just about to be flooded with links in the chat as I go through these. So take note, but you'll also get them all in a follow-up email if you don't happen to copy and paste them all right now. If you do want to speak up, if you want to connect with your lawmakers, but you're just not sure how to do that, you're just not comfortable yet, our volunteer lobbying team program trains volunteers to advocate effectively with their state legislators about these issues. So if what you heard tonight, makes you really passionate that you want to advocate for increased and permanent funding for whole home repairs, connect with our volunteer lobbying team. We'll give you the talking points. We'll walk you through how to, tell your story so that you can get out there talking to the people that make these decisions in Harrisburg. All right, so something a little bit different. The slide looks very, very dramatic on the screen here, full screen. So we have an action alert that we just launched today related to carbon capture and sequestration legislation. This involves capturing CO2 emissions from industries and storing them deep underground. Some lawmakers in Harrisburg are trying to have this included in the budget, or it really, really doesn't belong. So not only is this bill, SB 831, extremely weak in how it's regulating CCS, it does things like passing on liability for the storage of this carbon underground to the taxpayers of Pennsylvania for forever. There's a whole bunch of issues related to this. If you click into the action alert, it's going to give you some more information. Really quick form, you put in your information, it's going to send it out to all of your representatives so you can help us advance the argument that it doesn't belong in the budget, and it's also not adequate legislation the way it stands, even if it is put out separately from the budget. We also have an action alert related to solar for schools. You may have heard about this one. So the great news is just a couple of hours ago, the House passed HB 1032, which was the solar for schools bill. So that's wonderful news, but our action alert is still live because we haven't reached the end yet, right? It still needs to go to the Senate and needs to go to the governor's desk. So we would still like you to fill out that action alert. It's going to go to your state senators for now so we can get this moving forward. It's going to help provide grants to install solar at public schools, community college, technical schools. It funds 50% of the cost of project construction, and then the IRA covers 30 to 50% more. So it's a really great way to lower energy costs, create jobs, and really, support students in a climate justice way. All right, so those are our two action alerts. I'm sure Kelsey's getting those in the chat. As usual, if you've been following us this series since it started, we have a energy story bank we've been collecting, right? So we've been asking people to submit anything that they'd like to share about someone who's been affected by dirty fossil fuels, if your community's been affected, what steps your community's taken to transition, what your hopes and dreams are for your community, roadblocks that are happening. Maybe there's an amazing organization that you think we should bring to one of these Clean Energy for All sessions. Let us know who that is. So that form is always live. You can always jump in there and share your energy story with us. We also have a new climate justice podcast, which perhaps you're going to hear from Michelle and Emily again in a future episode. I don't know. But Branches of a Movement just launched. So the first episode is already available, but we would love to have you sign up to get new episodes direct into your inbox so you can learn a little bit more about what is happening in the climate justice movement across the state. Okay, more links for you. Our next Clean Energy for All webinar is in September. We are skipping the summer. I'm sure everyone's going on vacation if you're not already there, because you're not here tonight, you're on vacation now. So that is going to be September 13th. The title of that right now is Solar Success Stories. So that kind of hints at what our content is going to be. The registration is open for that if you would like to book your evening for Wednesday, September 13th. And then I also encourage you to check out our conservation teams that have to do with our energy work. So our clean energy team is meeting on July 10th. Our dirty energy team is meeting on July 26th. These volunteer-led teams discuss, educate, take action on all of the energy issues in the state. And we also have a grassroots power building team where we do a lot of activism, writing letters to the editor, phone text banking on issues, you know, the full gamut of environmental issues. So that team is next meeting on Monday, July 10th. And then the very last link we're plugging in there is an event feedback form. We would love to hear what you liked about tonight's session, what you didn't like. If you have suggestions for future sessions, we have some topics we've listed there that we would love to hear which ones you would want to learn more about. So that would be great if you could fill out our feedback form. With that, I am going to close screen sharing, which has just been not working for us tonight. And we will go ahead and start taking questions. We always lead off with any questions that may be in the chat that's stacked up. So we'll see if there are any of those. And then we'll just go in the order of hands raised or, people putting the question in the chat. All right, Kelsey, were there any in the chat that we
There were not any in the chat prior to this.
So then take it away, Robin.
I will. I've just got deep gratitude for the presentation. It was really interesting to hear, and I have a ton of questions, but I'll zero in on one, which is about workforce development and how to hire for home repairs what may be smaller local contractors. So how are you balancing the need to, build more unionized labor in Philadelphia and with, maybe the lack of capacity right now for some of those smaller contractors to hire union labor? And maybe that's a really long question to try and answer. I'd be interested.
It's a great question. I think it's like one that so happily the whole home repair program as it passed included workforce development funding. That was a very thoughtfully included there by Nikhil Saval's office, who crafted that bill. There's going to be a big question around prevailing wage that is going to come up, especially if, as we're all hoping, that it gets permanent funding, because those projects right now have a cap in whole home repair at 50 grand, or like that's the grant per household that it allots. The state has a requirement at the state level, so it applies to Philly, it applies everywhere that's happening, and that if projects are over 25,000, prevailing wage is required. And so the union question is gonna happen. Pennsylvania is pretty strange. This may be more detail than I should actually say, but I don't know how to say it shorter. So I'm going to try to say a very condensed thing, basically, which is just that, like, it's going to be a really big question. Philly has done a pretty good job of having a list of contractors for a bunch of these jobs that prioritizes Black and brown owned businesses, women owned businesses, etc. Almost all the residential stuff is not union work. So there's this other question that's like, it's great. That priority list is important. It's good that it exists. It has some problems, but it's still good that it exists. But what it does inadvertently sometimes is means that the large scale industrial jobs, which are not as full of like Black and brown owned, women owned businesses, are largely union jobs. And the jobs that are residential are largely not. And there's gonna have to be a big conversation around that. It's definitely part of the stuff that's coming up for PGW. Those folks it's not even so much like technical training, it's the fact that those jobs are union and the solar install jobs are not. And so they are not seeing that transition as financially equivalent, even if they're seeing it as a skill set that they could do. And we're gonna have to, making green jobs sustaining jobs is a fight. We're gonna have to fight for that. A lot of them are not unionized right now.
Thank you.
Yeah, no, I think it's a great question. I wish we had a like better, just like, here's the answer. But yeah, Michelle, go for it. I don't know if you want to add.
Yeah, I mean, I would just say that it's something, yeah, we're very actively thinking about and trying to partner with as many groups in that arena as we can. And I was like, oh, this was this was an article we were happy to see recently about, kind of the job training element. But yeah, as Emily said, it's a really big conversation because typically if you're just getting work done on your house, like if you're just calling a plumber in Philly, or if you're getting a solar panel installed, like you're probably not calling like a union plumber. That tends to be for like much larger jobs because of this prevailing wage thing. So yeah, it's a big question of like, how does it fit into what is essentially like many small scale residential projects, but it's definitely something we're thinking about.
And folks like ECA who are running a bunch of those training programs are like really trying to think about how do we level the contractors up, not just make all these jobs union, but actually capacitate these smaller contractors so they could do something like handle the amount of paperwork that is required for some of these prevailing wage ones. And like, how do we build those folks up so that they're tiering up, not just getting first level jobs, but that they're actually being like capacitated to be able, a lot of the city level, municipal level work, also it's slow to pay. So a bunch of these contractors that are smaller can't wait in the way that they're not getting like 50% upfront, but they're like, so where it's like there's a bunch of small details that actually make it hard for those folks to move up that ladder directly then into that thing. They don't have the admin support. They can't front large sums and then get paid back. And so it's going to be about unionization, but it's also about how do we not just develop skills, but actually develop resources for those small contractors to be able to go larger, so that they can be candidates for those jobs and they're not just out candidated, not because they don't have the skills, but because they don't have the infrastructure.
Do we have any other questions?
Well, I don't want to jump in front of anybody else. I did have another question, but does somebody else have a question?
I don't see any hands or chat. So yeah, go ahead, Robin.
Well, I was just curious about the Huntington Park event, and will it be appropriate and possible to include some materials for homeowners about IRA program benefits that they might be able to take advantage of.
Yeah, it'd be awesome.
Yeah, I was gonna say I mostly talked about renters tonight and like tenant-led activism because it's just so much harder to get any kind of repairs done. But you know, Philadelphia does have a huge proportion of, like, compared to other cities, of people who both own their home but are lower income, and that there's a lot of like working class people who are homeowners but might not have like the equity or the ability to just go and like, you know, lay out a bunch of money. So I think those programs are also going to be really important.
And the folks who are like the Hunting Park Neighborhood Energy Center who's part of the coalition, but there are like 13 of those neighborhood energy centers throughout, and they're like a place that folks can walk in. And a lot of what they do is like LIHEAP applications or helping people not have gas shutoffs and stuff like that. But I will say that they're really asking to also be trained as a trainer so that they feel like they know how to offer those resources to folks when they're walking in the doors of those places. And it's like a need that they don't feel 100% equipped in yet. Yep.
Emily, do you mind doing a jargon draft for LIHEAP?
Oh yeah, no problem. So it is the low income access program around utility bills. So you could apply and get support in order to prevent shutoffs of things like gas and electric. One of the things we're also fighting for is to extend LIHEAP year round. Right now, mostly what LIHEAP has historically been framed around, historically meaning across the past couple of decades that it existed, is preventing people from having their heat shut off in the winters, right? Like, we don't want folks going cold, freezing in their homes, but what is becoming increasingly urgent and does not exist currently is LIHEAP for the summer, so that people's air conditioners aren't shut off as the danger of extreme heats are going higher, and particularly folks who are medically vulnerable or who are elderly and a bunch of other things don't have that shut off, and we have not won that yet. That will be an upcoming thing in the upcoming year or two to push around. It doesn't currently exist.
Thank you.
Right, so we are at 7:30. So last call for any final questions. If you think of something after we conclude, of course, reach out and we'll try and get you a response to that. So last call on any questions.
Maybe,
All right.
should I say one last thing? It's just to say, like, we do have a bunch of resource stuff. If folks, this could be something to tell Melissa if you want, like, that are like, here's what heat pumps are. Here's what, like, I don't have a full gauge of like exact, like, I think there, if folks were hoping for a little bit more of like, what could I do to my home? There are like things definitely that both Here for Climate Justice has and that Sierra Club has. I think that part of what we have really tried to focus on in Here for Climate Justice is just this part of like, it can't just be our own homes. Like, how do we make sure we're not just like repairing for ourselves in a way that actually both leaves a bunch of others behind and like continues to be to our own detriment because of all the fact that so many other people are left behind. So, but I do think it's awesome when people do stuff to their own house and can like make that. I think we just want to be pushing for both. Like, you can electrify, and we don't want only those who can to electrify and other folks to be left on a kind of broken, infinitely more expensive, infinitely more harmful system. So
yeah, get a convection stove and show all your friends that it's great, just as good as a gas stove. You know, I think there are like those narrative pieces too that can happen.
Yeah, that's a great point. So if folks do end up with questions, related to what Emily just said, we can certainly also pass along those resources. Maybe that's an idea for a future session, right? We could also do something that kind of hones in more on the individual. So I see Bill is putting in the chat, here's a climate reality electrification pledge. Wonderful. We'll grab that link and include that in the resources that we send out to folks as well. So thank you for
Also,
that.
just want to lift up that several of you on here are already doing this work in incredible ways. So just acknowledging that the audience is the activists already in many ways. Yeah, so cool.
All right. Well, thank you everyone for coming tonight. I hope everyone is taking care of themselves and their lungs with our current air situation. Take care, everyone. Thank you, Emily and Michelle. Wonderful, so interesting. Thank you, Kelsey. We will see you in September. Have a wonderful couple of months, everyone.
Thanks, Melissa.
Thank you so much.
Carry on.
Thank you so much.